Hey guys, it's Alex. Last week, Ethan and I talked about how to keep yourself healthy when your kids get sick. And because those who can't do teach, Ethan is out sick this week with strep throat. So I thought we would rebroadcast one of our favorite episodes to do, the stories of when we became dads. This is part one. You can find part two on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Always worth a re-listen. Thanks for tuning in, for sticking with us, and hopefully we should be back next week with fresh content. See you guys. Welcome back to the Working on the Dad Pod. I'm Alex. With me, as always, my co-host Ethan. Today, we are working on pregnancy and working a little bit on birth too. Ethan, how you doing today?
I am doing okay. Not my best day, and I'll just feed that into I'll switch it up and start with my loss because it impacts how I'm feeling today.
Sure.
My oldest daughter, she's almost 4, and right when I got into the office, I see an email from our preschool where both our daughters go. One is, of course, in the infant room. And it is a note to say that there is a case of COVID in the class. It is August 16th, 2023, the day that we are recording. So we are most likely dealing with the new strain of COVID Eris, as they're calling it. Sounds like if in fact it's spread, then it's probably going to hit the family, which is a little over a year after we all got it. About 30 minutes after that email, we got another email that said case of strep. And that's like, honestly, just like with all the antibiotics and like, keeping the kissing away from like sisters, that one is like so much more of a headache. Especially because my daughter, who has caught strep every single time it's hit her class, she also happens to be allergic to amoxicillin, which is like the big antibiotic for like catch-all.
Sure.
She usually goes with azithromycin. However, apparently you can only have that be on a
A cycle of it.
a cycle of it once every 60 days. So that would leave, should she have strep, that would leave ceftonir, which for those of you who are unaware, because we were not aware when she went on it the one time, is the possible side effect is you can end up with transitory or temporary lactose intolerance, which lasted about 8 weeks. So should my daughter get strep, it seems like we have to just roll the dice and go with lactose intolerance, which is, its own set of issues. So hopefully she doesn't get it. Hopefully the baby doesn't get it, who will be turning 1 next week. But it's just, definitely put a damper on the day because my wife and I are now on COVID strep watch. So,
Yeah,
probably
that's
not going to
tough.
sleep much tonight.
That is tough. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. But
Thanks.
I'll change it up and switch up to a win. So we were talking in our like feeding our kids episode about getting the various tools and tactics we use to get our kids to eat their
Mhm.
dinner, right? And how we might partition the plates. One thing I don't think I discussed, and if I did, I apologize, but the win is that it worked, is one tactic that I found on social media probably a couple weeks ago. And I've used a couple times now, but I used it earlier this week. And it was really helpful was instead of, and this is mostly exclusively for my daughter, is when they get that attitude of like they're coming to the dinner table and they absolutely hate what you put in front of them, they won't take a bite. They're being argumentative about eating it, because maybe they didn't get to choose it or whatever, and they're not in it. You could And frankly, that doesn't matter because there's been times where I've asked her specifically what she wants out of the recipes I have, like the ingredients and recipes I have available, and she'll pick it and then she'll hate it. And so what
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
started doing is this trick that I heard, instead of like, you know, instead of just bending over backwards and saying, "What do you want?" and giving her the chicken nuggets or the yogurt or grilled cheese or whatever she's going to ask for, saying, "Okay, if you don't want dinner, here is X," and X is always the same sort of nutritionally complete meal that they can be offered, and it's always the same alternative. And so what we've gone with, because I don't want to like even chicken nuggets. They're like 5 minutes in the air fryer from dead frozen without preheating. Pretty simple. But I don't even go that far. I say you can have a piece of bread with peanut butter and carrot sticks because carrots last forever in the fridge, right? And so like
Mm-hmm.
I've always got carrots available. I can cut half a carrot into some carrot sticks, one slice of bread with some peanut butter. I'm like, is this the best meal that has ever been created for a kid? No, but does it have fats, proteins, carbs, vegetables? Yes. And so I
Yeah.
say, okay, I've started doing this, and she's actually gotten pretty good about it. And sometimes she actually chooses that, but it's like, okay, you either can have peanut butter and carrot sticks, or you can have the dinner that's in front of you. And so that's worked a couple times now, and it's worked pretty well. And instead of doing the like dividing it up and eating half, or here's how much you have to eat, it's like I give her like 4 carrot sticks. Like I said, half of a actual carrot, and then I quarter it into sticks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, you have to eat the whole thing. You have to eat the whole thing. Like, if you're going to complain about dinner, you eat one slice of bread with peanut butter on it, and you eat the carrot sticks, and then you can have whatever snack you want. So that's my win, because she's taken to that. She doesn't always choose that option. Sometimes she chooses to, argue
Sure.
about the dinner instead of it. But it's become a way to simplify the like, I get up, I spend 2 minutes preparing this plate. She gets it, debate over.
I like that. I will actually take that and talk to my wife about it right after we record because we find ourselves in a similar situation, and we usually default to reheating like a leftover from that like we still
Yeah.
have, you know. But
Yeah,
I kind
my
of
my
like
daughter
that.
usually debates that.
Mm,
Yeah, she'll be like, "I
nice.
don't want any of the food," because she's made up her mind that she wants chicken nuggets, or she wants us
Mm,
to like go get her food or make something that we don't have. And I'm like, "Nope, let's simplify this." And it's kind of the routine thing of like, now she understands that if she doesn't want dinner, that's what she can get, and she likes it. She likes those things. Like I didn't pick it as a punishment. I picked it as things that like I know she generally likes and does not have a problem with. And so that's why it kind of works. So I think if you've got a kid that likes something else a little bit
yeah.
better, you know there are a bunch of ways to do that. Maybe you have hard boiled eggs that you have on standby in the fridge or something like that, to get them to eat something.
No, that's
Yeah,
definitely a good trick. I'm always hesitant, or not hesitant. I'm always curious to see how my older daughter will do with peanut butter because she's been so trained to like chickpea butter because of her nut-free preschool that
sure.
sometimes she'll have peanut butter and be like, "Oh, this doesn't taste like the real thing," and it's like, "No, this is the real thing.
Oh,
The
poor,
chickpea butter is not the
oh,
real
sweet
thing."
summer child.
Yeah,
Like,
so it's
yeah,
funny.
but my kids have peanut butter every morning in their oatmeal. And so they regularly get it. They never took to the nut butter alternative, so they just don't have that in
Yeah.
their lunch.
Well, so
Those
we're
years.
really big on spreading chickpea butter on pretzel chips because she'll eat a whole bag of pretzel chips, but we're like, how do we make this not a whole bag of pretzel chips? We just put the chickpea butter, and then
Yeah,
like in our minds, we feel better about it. Um,
sure.
yeah. My win's actually eating related too. I mentioned a little bit ago that my baby girl will be 1 next week, and we were on a vacation last week at my father-in-law's house up in Breezy Point, New York, which is right by the Rockaways. And
Nice.
during the trip was like a night and day of like her eating. Like before, we had like the bottles, we'd like be able to get her to have some like pouch, some uh teething crackers or puffs, like the stuff that like will dissolve, essentially like choke free. And then but no, like now she's like, over this vacation she was just like, I am hungry. And she was
There you
just
go.
going to Chow Town like 3 meals a day. It was kind of just like we've like thrown her like actual food. Like she's eating everything, and it's great. So like that was kind of a she got us in right under the wire. So when we have her 1 year appointment next week at the doctor, they'll be like, is she eating 3 meals a day? She is. And they are in
Crushing
fact
3 meals a
solids.
day.
Yeah,
Doctor,
I
no
am not.
worries here. I weren't
This is
worried. You were worried.
yeah. Get out of here, doctor. You're the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my win. I will just
Nice.
say, it was so nice to be on vacation, have help with kids, and like not have to cook for myself. So that was
Yeah.
lovely. And
That's
obviously,
nice.
our audience knows I'm from Los Angeles originally, and that you and I went to college in Miami. So just being able to like go to the beach,
Yeah.
like multiple times in a week was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Definitely
That's
makes me
that's
miss
always
home.
nice.
So,
It's one of those things. I live 10 minutes from the beach, and I rarely get there multiple times in a
yeah,
week. I rarely get there weekly. I would say I probably go maybe a couple times a month.
yeah,
But especially in August, it's so hot that it's like almost unpleasant, and it's like, you know, we have a pool, so like
yeah,
rather just go out to the pool than pack up all the stuff that we need and diapers and snacks and all that. But
yeah. No,
um,
man, I'm jealous. I'm really thankful that here, in the DC area, we have some really good friends who live, um, literally a 3 minute drive from us. It's like 1 mile, but they have a pool, and they are of the philosophy that the pool is too good to not share with others. So I was like,
I love that.
cool,
Love that.
you guys are the best.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So my loss for this week, it was actually originally I had a loss pegged from last night, and it spilled into this morning. It's sort of the same thing, but my daughter, as Ethan mentioned, we're recording in early August. Last week, she started VPK. And for those that aren't in Florida, that stands for voluntary pre kindergarten. So it's preschool, but in Florida, it has that fancy acronym because the state pays for 3 hours of it every single day for every kid in the state, as long as you register with the Department of Early Learning. And so with that, it has become a more structured and regimented class for her. Right? She's in the same, daycare preschool that she's been in. A lot of her same classmates, so that adjustment hasn't been the tough part, but it's become a lot more of like the first few weeks. The teacher was prepping us last Tuesday at the open house that it's just a lot more like rules and getting them prepped for kindergarten and being in like a classroom learning setting, not just like we're going to have story time and then maybe we're going to learn a little bit about frogs at one point in the day and then it's
Hmm.
mostly going to be playing. It's not like that. And so my daughter's been struggling with that rules adjustment, but it's not just like, oh, she's struggling at school. Like we haven't gotten any negative feedback. Like the teacher has kind of sent notes to the whole class in our app saying,
Hmm.
like, yeah, people are adjusting, kind of thing, but to be expected. But it's led to her breaking down a lot, and just being like really like on a hair trigger, right? With a lot of simple stuff. And last night it kind of boiled over. I've mentioned our bedtime routine before, where it's like 7:35, we brush teeth, go potty, get pajamas on, then we read two, children's books or two chapters out of a chapter book, usually about Disney princesses.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and last night was a night that my mother-in-law was supposed to read to them on video chat, and my daughter was just breaking down. She didn't want to brush her teeth. She didn't want to go potty. She didn't want to put on her pajamas, but it wasn't just like, I'm not going to do it. It was screaming at the top of her lungs, like inconsolable. And my wife and I were both trying to be calm with her and all that stuff. And we finally get her in the bathroom. And I say, okay, brush your teeth. She walks right back out and hurls the toothbrush at my wife's head. She's she's no Nolan Ryan. She missed by a mile,
Sure,
but
sure,
we
sure,
knew where
sure.
she was trying to go with it. Almost hit her brother, and so we took a book away for that. Usually the punishment if she's not
Mhm.
getting her act together is we'll take away a book, and then if you violate the rules a second time or you're lollygagging around, playing around, horsing around, and not getting your pajamas on or whatever, and you run out of time, then you'll lose a second book. Well,
Mhm.
she just absolutely couldn't get it together. Part of the problem, I think, is the rules at school. Part of it was she and her brother were up from like 5 a.m. that day and just didn't go back to sleep. And they normally sleep until about 6:30. So they lost out a
Mhm.
little bit of sleep. She doesn't nap anymore. And so she was rough. And so she lost it. And I felt bad like having to enforce the consequence, but at the same time, like I'm very much of the mindset like if I say that this is going to be a consequence, like following through is more important. Like picking the consequence to be immediate, relative, to the situation, not overblown, like not I'm going to take away this thing forever, but something that can immediately be done. Not like you can't go to the park on Saturday or whatever. And we had to do that. And she was frustrated and she went to bed sobbing. But by the time my wife got done nursing my son and put him down, she was out like a light because she was exhausted. Right.
Mhm.
So it lasted 3 minutes and then she was done. She had no more gas in the tank. And then this morning, same thing happened, but it was with brushing her hair. And like she had decided and made up in her mind that she needed to straighten her hair with her hands. It's not a thing. She was asking my wife for a braid, right? And my wife's like, I'll braid your hair, but you got to come here right now because I got to go. Like, I've got a client coming and you've got to get off to school. So, like, stop doing that, turn around. And she just like argued with my wife and argued with my wife for about 5 minutes about turning around on the floor and sitting down to get her hair braided. And eventually my wife's like, okay, this is your last chance or I'm walking away. And she had to walk away. And my daughter, we were going to the gym first, and she just yells at me the entire way there, Daddy, give me a braid. Daddy, give me a braid. I'm like, even if I had the things to give you a braid, I am not negotiating with terrorists. I didn't say that to her, but that's how I felt. Like, you're yelling
Yeah.
at me. I'm not going to, like, even if I could, I wouldn't do it because, like, you're yelling at me nonstop. She eventually calmed down. She got better, but it's something that I did some reading on right after, and apparently it's a pretty common problem when kids get into VPK that they're struggling, that there's just a lot more rules and regulations and things they have to follow, and so they tend to lash out at authority figures, especially when they get home and can sort of like be in the safety of their own home and just like, I'm tired of rules, I want to do exactly what I want. So yeah, that
Yeah.
was that was rough.
Yeah, that I almost listed off a series of similar losses. Um,
Yeah.
just my daughter's about a year younger than yours. For those of you listening, and same thing. Like we're clearly, you know, the home is a safe space, and she spends all day at school. You know, being on good behavior. So
Sure.
sometimes when like the first thing that happens is she comes home and she's acting out and we need her to behave, um, it kind of just escalates even further, and it's kind of like a lose-lose situation because obviously you can't like ignore it and just be like keep doing what you're doing, that's like super destructive to our evening, but it just sometimes like in our case never goes well when it's like, hey, can you just like take a deep
No, like
breath
you
and
gotta like in a lot of cases you just gotta let them feel their feelings and get it out of their
yeah,
system a little bit. And I won't go because we've got a lot to talk about and a lot of things that I think we both want to say on pregnancy and birth. But
yeah,
I would encourage everybody. This is something Ethan and I have talked about well before we started this podcast. But Google the concept of special time if this is something you're struggling with. It's something from psychology about giving kids one-on-one time to help build that connection when they're melting down after a long day at school of behaving and following the rules and doing all the things they're supposed to be doing and wanting to retaliate. Um, Instituting special time, and I'll just leave it at that. Special time is actually the term that is used. So you should be able to find some articles on that if you're struggling with that. That can be a way. It helps us a little bit, but I also understand that it's not always 100% feasible to especially when you've got multiple kids, to
Yeah.
have a parent doing special time, because it does require one-on-one attention
Yeah.
for a solid 10-15 minutes. Um, but anyway, let's get into pregnancy and birth.
Yeah.
So I think with this one, Ethan and I we have two kids. We have not been pregnant ourselves. We have been partners to pregnant people, and I don't want to say that's where the similarities end, but I think there are a lot of differences between our various journeys through being a partner to a pregnant person and birth, and things we've dealt with. And I think there's some similarities in the things we've dealt with in different ways, just from what we know. But do you want to start, or do you want me to
So
start sort of about the pregnancy journey and what it was like?
So I would like to just start just like by just kind of like setting the stage, just like obviously let's not get into conception, but from the get go, like um, so in my situation, I I've known for a long time I wanted to be a dad. My
Yeah.
wife, not really. Being a mom, wasn't like something she like really wanted. So being pregnant was not something she was entirely looking forward to.
Right.
Um, would you say that? How so? Like, I'll stop there. Let you enter.
Yeah, I think on the spectrum for us, I think my wife went through the best way I can describe it, and I feel like through some of her friends went through this sort of same thing of like in the early 20s. We got married when we were 24, and like through our 20s it was not like a high priority, and it was not something she was like yearning for. And then it got to a point where when we chose to have kids, it was like, we want this. It's something we both wanted. I always wanted to be a dad. I wasn't like beating down the door when we first got married, because again, we were 24 years old. We were living in
Mhm.
New York City. I wasn't dead sure that that's where we wanted to raise a family. Spoiler alert, we didn't. And so it's just like, yeah, I think and a couple of her friends have sort of gone through that same thing. So it's all anecdotal evidence, but this idea of like not really being ready to have kids, and then hitting a point where it's like it kind of hits them where, I don't know whether it's the, metaphorical biological clock. I guess it's not really metaphorical. There's data behind the biological clock, but the biological clock, or just feeling like it's time, we're in the right place. We're in the right place with our relationship emotionally.
Right, but so and that ours is like also similar, but I guess for your wife, would you say there was like a not like excitement, but like looking forward to the to being pregnant, like the pregnancy?
Yes and no. Like, I
Okay.
think she was looking forward to, I don't know. Like, it's tough to say. I don't want to say we didn't talk about it, because that's not
Hmm.
true. But like, I think she was excited to have a kid. I think pregnancy, especially the first time around, and that's the thing. Like, it drastically changed between the two, right? So
Right.
the first time, I think there's that nervousness,
Hmm.
anxiety about, doing it right, reading all the books, making sure, there's a million thing long checklist of like what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do, what's good, what's bad. And as you already alluded to, there's going to be a bunch of people in your ear about it. And so at the time, for her, she was working in a fitness studio, and it was almost exclusively like female clientele. And it was a little
Hmm.
bit higher end. And so it was a lot of like older stay-at-home moms, or housewives, with kids out of the house kind of thing, but just a lot of moms in there. And so a lot of opportunity for a lot of unsolicited feedback, the moment she told people she was getting pregnant. And it was like one of those things. She taught classes, but she also like worked at the front desk, so like everybody saw
Mm.
her. They walk in the door, they see her. Once the belly starts showing, boom.
Yeah.
So I think that was it. Like, and like, it's a very foreign thing. I think, having not experienced it, but it's a very foreign thing to have happen to your body. Yes, it's very natural, but at the same time, like your body starts going through a ton of changes when you get pregnant, and that can be pretty overwhelming. So I think she had done her homework on that. And so I think
Hmm.
she was already anxious about the effects that hadn't come yet,
Right. So
even before they did.
yeah. So I would say, you know, in my wife's case, she was like, "All right, we've made the decision. We want to start trying." Then we got pregnant, and she was just like, "All right, now like I'm gonna hate my life for the next 40 weeks."
Yeah.
Um, I was trying to be more positive until I realized that I just had to agree with her that and just be like, "Yeah, you're like just gonna like you want me to tell you this sucks, so I'm gonna tell you this sucks." If like if that makes you like happier, then
Yeah.
like whatever. Um,
Yeah.
so in our case, you know, so the way I just kind of want to what I was hoping to talk about today is like obviously we were not the ones pregnant. I did use the phrase "we are pregnant" as in me and my
Yeah.
wife because I want to be a full-on partner. Obviously, I'm aware
Yeah.
there wasn't a baby
My,
girl
my,
inside.
my wife loathes that. So if we're talking about
Yeah,
feelings, I don't use that because she's like,
right.
the hell you are.
Yeah,
The hell you are.
right.
Like,
See, my wife actually liked the like
sure,
full-on partnership
sure.
kind of thing.
And this is something my wife and I talked about. Like, I mentioned to her what we were talking about before I came out here, and
Okay.
she goes, the pregnant person is always right. End of episode.
That's
And I'm
fair.
like, but that's a case in point. The pregnant
Yeah,
person is right. If they want to
yeah,
say we're pregnant, you say
sure.
we are pregnant. Look
Right.
at my belly, my hairy
Yes.
belly.
Yeah.
Like,
And you know what? I did my part. I gained the pregnancy weight, the sympathy weight.
there you go.
I matched. We were fine. We were fine.
Sure, there you go.
Yeah, that's why I did it. That's why we're working on the dad pod now. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, so I'm just gonna get into it. So we were very lucky in with regard to the ease of getting pregnant. So like
yeah,
once that happened, we thought, oh, like this is gonna be a breeze. So we did our so we go to our first we did the pregnancy confirmation, which in our case was my wife had a blood and urine test, and then a week later you come back and it was like the audio only like little ultrasound thingy, and then we got to the point 4 weeks later where we get the first ultrasound, and that was when we learned that my wife has something called a uterine fibroid. If
yeah,
you have never heard of a uterine fibroid, that's fine. A lot of doctors have not. It is a very undercovered part of women's healthcare and women's physiology, where it's essentially like a benign growth either inside or outside of your uterine wall. It can be on either part. And in my wife's case, it started as a 5 centimeter growth in diameter on the inner part of the wall. So our baby, now our almost 4 year old little girl, had what we called a womb mate. And um, just to educate some folks here about what a fibroid does is over like the fibroid feeds on the same kind of nutrients that is going on in the body. So at some point you're going to have a war where the baby and the fibroid are like fighting over the amount of resources available.
yeah,
And that usually results in the fibroid going through what they call degeneration, where it essentially dies. But like it doesn't go anywhere, it just dies. And that happened to my wife about 15 weeks into the pregnancy, where she was essentially on bed rest for 72 hours because she was in this terrible pain where we had to go. I had to take her. to the emergency room. They had to do an ultrasound because like we were very scared that like it was the
Sure.
baby and not the fibroid. And uh, you know, basically they were just like, you either have to deal with this pain for 72 hours, or we need to prescribe you some Oxycontin. And our first thought was, oh my God, like if she takes the Oxycontin, our baby is gonna like grow up with like 4 arms and three
Right.
eyes. And, you know,
Yeah.
that is, that's an overreaction based on like a
But it's
lot
a
of
natural, I
holistic.
mean,
Yeah.
everything you get in pregnancy,
Yeah.
every like data point like that, it scares you and you think of the worst case
Mhm.
scenario. That's pretty natural
Right.
to do. Logic
So,
be damned.
right. So yeah, like she was prescribed, enough Oxycontin for us to pay for this house, but really what we used was a single 5 milligram dose, and what that did was it allowed my wife to sleep, and then I
Yeah.
switched her immediately to the Tylenol, which
Yeah.
yes, Tylenol, which is still fine at that point in the pregnancy. At some point in the pregnancy, like I forget exactly what it is, but there's a time in pregnancy when acetaminophane fine, acetaminophen fine, and then there's a time when ibuprofen's fine. We were in the acetaminophen time. Anyway, um, so we had to do that just so like she could sleep. And let's flash forward to the end of the pregnancy. The fibroid ends up being 11 centimeters in diameter. So it doubled in size and
Big old.
resulted in my daughter, or not resulted in, but simultaneously, my daughter was breech. Never flipped over. We
Yeah.
assumed it was because of the fibroid, but actually, it was just one of those non-threatening. She got caught up in the umbilical cord and like literally couldn't
Sure.
turn over. But it wasn't
Sure.
like not in a dangerous way, just like in an annoying way. Um,
Yeah.
so so basically, I want to say that I had to learn a lot about this whole under researched, under discussed part of um, women's healthcare, and like if I could be king, or in this case, for the sake of the episode, if I could be queen for a day, I would
Sure.
add an annual ultrasound to every woman's gynecological annual appointment, because only right now they say fibroids are in 20% of women, but that is only 20% of women that get ultrasounds. So think
Yeah.
about every single woman who's never been pregnant or had like any kind of ovarian cyst issue. They've never
Yeah.
had an ultrasound. So
Yeah.
we don't know how common this really is.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll recoup. I'll regain my focus and kick to you for a bit.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Go because if nothing else, you're bringing awareness to it, and it's always
Yeah.
something in the massive checklist of things that you want to ask your doctor or physician's assistant or midwife or whoever you're seeing. That you want to ask them these kind of questions and make sure that you're prepared for it. Make sure they're looking for it, and also one of the things you really want to do is get a family history.
Mhm.
And that way, it's something that your daughters, you know, many years from now can talk with their medical providers about. But for us, and I know you're going to get into stigmas and stuff a little
Yeah.
bit later as we talk about birth and birth methods and things like that. But for us, we had to deal with a lot of um, stigmas because what we chose is my wife didn't, thankfully, it was also easy for us to conceive. And it was not, my wife didn't have any major complications. The only thing that she had as a sort of complication is at that time we were doing a plant-based diet, um, vegan, and it was just by choice, and it meant her iron was really low. And so that meant, and one of the best places to get iron is red meat. And so it meant that we had to like bend over backwards to make sure she was taking this iron supplement, the liquid form and a capsule form. And the liquid form, she said, tasted like pennies, and it was just terrible. Like drinking her cup of pennies every day, and making sure that she didn't take the iron supplement with, like almond milk or anything like that, because those things get fortified through the roof with calcium, and a lot of times end up having more calcium than cow's milk. And the calcium will block the iron absorption, and it sort of felt like we were in a laboratory, trying to get all the numbers right. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually at that point we've never really talked about cooking too much except in our food episodes. But I got really handy with a cast iron skillet, because you can get residual iron from the actual skillet absorbed into
Oh.
your food. And so I got really, it was like, okay, we're gonna, I'm cooking, I'm simmering tomato sauce in the cast iron skillet. Does it give it a slightly, more metallic iron taste? Absolutely. Was it worth it? Yeah. But it was a lot of that. And then by the end of it, like her iron wasn't going up, and it wasn't going up even with the supplements. And so we ended up once a week having to resort to steak night.
Mm.
And just straight up, eating red meat. Obviously, as we've talked about in our diet episode and maybe touched on the workout episode, we are no longer plant-based or vegetarian or anything like that. We had ground beef tonight. And so it was not as much of an issue during her second pregnancy, but it actually still was. And we ended up, I mentioned stigmas. We made the choice, or my wife was very interested in making the choice of having a home birth. And so that brought with it a lot of questions for me, right? Because I was like, you want to do what now? Like, and she had done her homework. She was able to answer all my questions. It wasn't just like, oh, I have a whim that I kind of want to do this. It was like she had done her homework on it. Like, she was very, like, sort of skeeved out by hospitals in the hospital setting, and she did not feel like she could be comfortable and relaxed and have the birth that she wanted there. And so we went to our local, there's a group of midwives that do home births. But we had to, like, we did a tour, and I basically, I don't want to say I had to sign off on it, but get my buy-in and get me convinced that it was a good idea. Because I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I've had 3 open heart surgeries in my life. Like, I trust hospitals. Hospitals have saved my life. Like, they were life-threatening conditions, and I wouldn't be here today without doctors and surgeons, things like that. So I walked into it like, you're skeeved out by hospitals. Hospitals are great. They get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And that brought a lot of questions from family and friends. You want to do what? Well, the thing about it was, with home birth in Florida, and this is not the case, every state has different laws. So if it's something you want to pursue or research, I wholeheartedly encourage everyone that has the slightest inkling to research it, take a free tour of a midwife facility and research it. That doesn't mean you have to commit, that doesn't mean you have to do it. But do it early, because they won't take you past a certain point in the pregnancy, probably about 20 weeks. But in Florida, there are a lot of rules, regulations, laws about how it has to be done. Your wife would not be allowed to do it. They wouldn't take her because of the fibroid.
Mm-hmm.
Twins, it's a no. If breech birth, let's say there was no fibroid and your daughter just didn't flip, they send you to the hospital. If your birth stalls for 30 minutes at any point, and there's no progress being made on dilation or movement or anything like that, you go to the hospital. It's just a lot of, like, safety nets and safety nets of, you can have the birth you want until it is medically risky for you to have that birth.
Mm-hmm.
But it was having a lot of, like, explaining that process to our parents, who had all given birth in hospitals, and were like, you want to do what? You want to have
Right.
this baby on your bed in your home? Like, we live 5 minutes from an emergency room, and 20 minutes from the hospital they would have sent us to, that they work closely with. So I was not, like, I was never really concerned about, we live in a small town, but we don't live out in the middle of nowhere. So I was
Right.
never concerned about that. But we faced a lot of stigmas around doing that. And luckily, my wife's best friend was pregnant at the exact same time. Like they found out the exact same day. Their due date was 5 days before ours, and their daughter ended up being a little early, ours a little late, and so the kids are 3 weeks apart. But they were in our birth class, which was at the home birth center, and they actually chose to have their baby at the center. They have basically glorified hotel rooms with large baths and beds and all these kinds of things that you can have it there, instead
So
of
it's a
having it at home.
it's a home birth, but not at your home.
Yeah, and they have a manic dog, and that was kind of the thing. They wanted the dog to not be around and have all the
Mm,
people. Like she's a Belgian Malinois, and she will jump on anybody and everybody and just
sure.
get super crazy. And it was just not something they wanted to have to deal with. And so,
So no, that I just find it's like it's so funny. It's like we'll give you the home birth experience, but you don't have to do it at your own home. We got it.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I think the option stays open pretty late in the pregnancy. Like they wanna know, but it's like, yeah, it's basically it's their office. It's where you're having all your appointments. Like they have their
Mhm.
exam rooms and they have their birth rooms, and those are separate. And there were times where we'd go in for an appointment, just to check in appointment, and there would be a sign up that's like quiet birth in progress, and we'd be there at like 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and somebody's having a baby a couple doors down. So it was a very cool experience, and like I said, I would encourage anybody to explore it because I think, but again, I would check what those underlying safety net rules and laws are about it, because there are some, I want to say, like Virginia, for example, right? So people that you may know, I want to say Virginia does not have a lot of laws around home birth. Like they're basically try to, make it unfeasible. And there are a lot of places that do that. And so what that leads is to people who are unlicensed or unregulated doing these births, or people doing it without the proper safety nets. And then if you run into complications, that can be pretty tragic. So feel free to research that if that's something you guys are interested in, but it's definitely, it definitely brought us a lot of questions from a lot of people.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, like we discussed a bit on like stigmas. So I'm sure as you mentioned, there was a lot of you're doing what, don't do that, you should do this instead. So I mentioned, like my wife was in excruciating pain, and the
Sure.
doctor here is explaining like it's either pain or like excruciating pain or the oxy when we were at that 15-week point. And you know like everybody becomes an expert in that moment.
Hmm.
Everybody who's like, well, you can't take the oxy because like like nobody said like you can't take the oxycontin because you'll kill the baby, but it was just like you just
That's
need
what
to
they were
stick it out.
implying, probably. Like
Right. Yeah. I
you're
mean,
really doing something wrong. You're a bad parent. Like,
right, yeah, stuff like that. And it's like, you know, and at some point, I just got really mad because
sure,
I'm not going to name any names, but let's say somebody very close to my wife who had two kids previously, who has been a mother, has like gone through this herself, knows how painful it can be, and knows that it is like her choice how she wants to live her pregnancy, go through her pregnancy. That like I kind of just wanted to be like, shut the f up, like you're not a doctor. You should be more supportive. You claim to be like pro women and women's autonomy and like doing the right thing, yet you're like
yeah,
talking over my wife and you are basically telling her that she doesn't know what she's talking about, and you're telling her to suffer through 72 hours where that has its own like issues in the pregnancy. And
sure,
it's just kind of like I wish, and now I'll dive into like why I really wanted to talk about this so much, is that a lot of my job through both the pregnancies was being there and like trying to knock down these stigmas. And I will say a lot of the stigmas tend to be mom to mom, woman to woman. And it'd be
yeah,
really great if they all at their next women's conference decided that they would just be nice to each other
Yeah.
because all of them go through different things. So
Sure.
I'm also going to say I never use the terms like natural birth and like C-section. I know I said
Sure.
C-section earlier, just like because
Yeah.
I had to set the stage, but I tend to use vaginal and belly birth, and I'll tell you why. Because even though we all know what you mean when you say natural birth, it is really hard for a mother to be, and a father to be, to hear you, to not you, Alex, but you,
No, I hear you.
to say like, if vaginal birth is called natural birth, then you're
Yeah.
basically saying my kid's not natural. And that is
Yeah.
like really effed up.
Yeah.
Because did my wife want to go through a traditional vaginal birth? Absolutely. Did we realize that plan might change when we found out about the fibroid? Yes. Did we then learn when my daughter was breech, that there was a chance, that there was even less of a chance? Yes. Did we send my wife to one of those pregnancy yoga classes that's like supposed to flip the baby? Yeah, we tried it. I was pretty sure I was just throwing money away, but we tried it and, we threw some money away. But she felt really good after it, so you know what? It's fine. But we the choice was taken away from us on
Yeah.
how this birth plan was going to go. And that did
Yeah.
not stop people from saying,
Here's what you
you
should
should
do.
flip the baby.
Yeah.
Here's what you should do. And it's like, you are not in these appointments with the ultrasound technician. You are not in these appointments with the doctor, the OBGYN, who has been my wife's doctor since she was 18. So
Yeah.
when we got, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, so this is one of those things where it's just, the
Like, you also
stigmas.
don't owe those people the
Yeah.
explanation of all the data points and the medical history and the personal information and how you arrived at your decision and having that conversation every single time
And
just because someone disagrees with you.
I couldn't agree with you more. But the one time I didn't go through all the data, the one time I didn't go through all the research, was the
Right.
time that somebody went to my wife and was like, "Your husband was really rude when I was just talking about your pregnancy." And then my wife talks to me. It's like, "Why are you being so rude to this person?" And it's like, I actually was not being rude. I just didn't care to give them the 15-minute spiel about why you and I are in the position we're in, because
Yeah.
they weren't going to listen anyway. And then,
Yeah.
so it just creates this like cascading effect of like
Yeah.
discomfort and anger between the parties, when really all that matters is that my wife and my baby are healthy, and that I am sane enough to make it through that 40-week process from start to finish, where I can
Yeah.
be the best partner I can be, where I can, have as much information. Like, the only, and granted, this was not the best timing, but the only time I was not with my wife for the, um, for that entire first pregnancy was I was starting a new job at the time, and I had a 5-day training, like, which was overnight. It was close enough where if I could get back in an emergency, but the only 2 times I could go was like 6 weeks before the baby was born, or like, a week after the due date. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to chance it and I'm going to go before. And so,
Yeah.
I missed one checkup, and you know what, like I'm pretty sure I was like texting her the entire time through it.
Yep.
So, so it's like one of those things where it's like, I was present, I was there, I knew what I was talking about. And I knew that ultimately all I could do was be that sounding board, and sometimes just a reminder in those tough moments where my wife was still like hopeful to the point where this birth plan could go through on the way we did it. I also want to
Yeah.
say,
Go ahead.
but sorry, I also want to say that there are like two big non-religious affiliated hospitals in the DC area. One is George Washington University, and one is Sibley. And Sibley has like is affiliated with a bunch of different OBGYN practices, and there's
Yeah.
the George Washington University Hospital Midwives Program. So our doctor was affiliated with Sibley, And, you know, everybody came at us with the research that Sibley does 60% more belly births than George Washington, so we should go to George Washington because they're like not going to force us to do it. And I was just kind of like, look, we are going to have to do this regardless if you agree with us or not. And
Yeah.
honestly, I'd rather go to the place that's done this 60% more than the place that has less practice
Right.
doing the belly births. Like
Right. I'm
I
sure it
don't
would have gone out fine, but like, because that's the thing. Like, I don't think the doctors in either scenario are, they're, and it's part of, so it's part of the reason. And I speak of this as from a place of like, again, my wife didn't have any complications. The iron, it was one of those things where if her iron hadn't been under control, then basically iron helps with clotting. And
Mhm.
so the idea would have been if her iron wasn't under control and she was too anemic, then she couldn't have actually done the home birth. So it was actually a concern of not having the birth she wanted, which is why we were going so hard and figuring everything out. Um, but yeah, it's something where like, you know, we were lucky enough to have that experience we wanted. But I will say that, you know, on the terminology front, like, you know, you mentioned using the term belly birth, and my wife not only has been through two pregnancies like your wife has, but she spends a lot of time as a prenatal and postpartum fitness trainer. That's her specialty, and so she
Mhm.
deals with a lot of moms to be and a lot of new moms in both her private personal training as well as in her day job. She just self-selecting sample, like she's a specialist there, and so she gets a lot of those types of people. um, and everybody's got different thoughts on the terminology, but the biggest thing that I have learned since going through the pregnancy process is like trying my best, and it's gotten so much easier because I just stopped caring, but trying my best not to like, I think there's this mentality that it sounds like a lot of people that you encountered have of, I did it this way, it worked. The
Mhm.
sample size of one or
Yep.
two or three, or you had five kids, I don't care. Your sample size is tiny. There are 8
Mhm.
billion people living on this planet, and a lot more were born before that. And they use that to say, therefore, this is right. I've got this tiny sample size, and therefore, what I did was right. And so I went in, we were doing um, birthing classes on something called the Bradley method, which is partner supported birth. It's unmedicated and all that stuff. And I drank the Kool-Aid and it worked for us. And so, yeah, like I'm still on board. And I think that the Bradley method is great. I think that home birth is great. And I would encourage anybody to check them out. But that is where I stop with my advice. I say, check this out. If it appeals to you or you have questions, I'm here, but not you should do it. Because what I've learned through my wife's experiences with her clients and talking with other people is like the most paramount thing, and I say this not as a medical provider, but the most paramount thing in my opinion, based on the anecdotal evidence available to me, is that the birthing person is comfortable,
Mhm.
right? That they are comfortable in the choices that they have made, the methods that they're choosing, the options that they have gone with. And like
Right.
creating doubt and creating fear among those choices has the potential to create worse birth experiences
Mhm.
for that person because they're second guessing it. They've got all these voices in their ear, in their head. And if they're not the type of person, my wife, and you know this, she's as strong willed as they come. So it was bouncing off of her like Teflon, and it wasn't going to affect her and it wasn't going to deter her. But at the same time, like that may not be everybody. But when it comes to terminology, like that's even something where I've talked to my wife before about the term belly birth, right? Because we actually used to use the term natural birth, but related to our birth, but we even delineated that term to mean not vaginal birth, but unmedicated vaginal birth. And so now we call it that, unmedicated vaginal birth,
Mm-hmm.
medicated vaginal birth where, maybe you have Pitocin to start the contractions, maybe you have an epidural because the pain's too much, and then you have a vaginal birth. And then she has told me that there are women out there who have had cesarean sections and had loathed the term belly birth. And
Mm-hmm.
there's other terms that have come up, cesarean birth. So you
Mm-hmm.
still give the person the honor, like the dignity of this was birth and their birth method, and they went through a birth experience, and it makes it sound less like a procedure, but they call it a cesarean birth, a
Mm-hmm.
vaginal birth, an unmedicated vaginal birth, a home birth, things that are factually accurate about the situation and not in any sort of gray area of value judgment. And I think that's something that, and I know there's tons of people out there that get really tired of feeling like the language police are out to say things like, use this way, use this way,
Mm-hmm.
use this way. It's going to differ from person to person. If your wife likes belly birth, call it a belly birth in front of her, or call it your term if you've had it, done to you. But like, don't chastise people for the terminology they use, or much more importantly, the birth method they use.
Sure, absolutely. And like, if I could just backtrack for a second, like with regard to like the actual term cesarean section, cesarean birth, like it was named after an emperor of Rome. He turned out
Yeah,
fine until he was assassinated. But the issue is
makes
like
a great salad.
it makes a great salad. The thing is, it's like
Cheap
it's
pizza.
not so much the term as much as it is like the when people it tends to get used far more negatively than positively. Like people don't come up and say, "Don't you dare have a belly birth. You do it like naturally." They go like, "Don't have a C-section." Just like don't have a C-section, whatever you do. And it's like again, that but when you say it that way, cuz tone does matter. You are definitely
Sure.
like take you the way it was said to my wife and I was that it was very tone deaf on the position we were in. And
Right. And that's the
and
thing. I think there are people that rightfully, I think that there are people that rightfully look at data, look at aggregates, and it's sort of this problem of like, yes, like you shouldn't take your one single experience and apply that to everybody. But it's also the problem with looking at data and saying, like if the WHO says that 80%, I'm making up that number, but it's a pretty high percentage of cesarean section procedures are unnecessary, are medically unnecessary to get the result or whatever. That doesn't mean that the person you're talking to isn't in the 20%.
right.
Like that doesn't mean that that person, just because there are a lot of XYZ happening and the data says that XYZ has this potential side effect, that doesn't mean that you have all the information about that one individual person, because that one individual person, you can't apply the entire, you can use the data set to evaluate the questions you ask and how you
Mm-hmm.
arrive at your decisions. But at the same time, like in your wife's case, it's like, yes, I, as somebody who's looked at that data and gone through those decision makings, do believe that cesarean sections are overprescribed. I also believe that there are people that they are a medically necessary procedure and a modern miracle that can save lives when
And
applied correctly. And your case absolutely falls under that umbrella.
yeah, and again, like we did not like lay there in bed the night we conceived and said, "I can't wait to cut this baby out of my stomach." All right, that like
Right.
wasn't like what we said. But
Yeah.
again, it's a thing where people come at it with the aggregate data, like you said. I would not disagree because I would be wrong. Yes, medical procedures tend to be overprescribed, especially in a
Sure.
lot of minority communities, with regard to birth, and
Yeah.
that shouldn't be the case. But there are scenarios like our
Right.
own where we are a privileged family. We are we are doing fine financially. Like we did not fall in all the typical demographics of why we would need to go that route. But
Yeah.
demographics, in our case, were overlooked when it came to the medical necessity for this decision.
Right.
And,
Right.
you know, I just wish, that people would actually listen to that before they come at
Yeah.
each other with the "you're doing it wrong," you're doing something that you don't need to do. Like your doctor is terrible for leading you down this path, and all it does is scare the patient. It scares the
Sure.
mother to be. It scares the father to be. Really, like I will say, I totally screwed up the day my first daughter was born because I was so anxious. I legit forgot to eat. So when we were scheduled for 2 o'clock, and around like 12:30, the doula, who was in the room with us because we still had a doula, was like, "Are you okay? Like, do you need me to get you a sandwich so I can like focus on her? When was the last time you ate?" And I was like, "Oh my god, I like didn't eat." And like basically, I was told I was messing up, and that is correct because I did not do my part in literally becoming like physically fit for what we were about to go through because
Yeah.
I was so focused on trying to make my wife comfortable and like 100% doubt free that this was like what we were supposed to do. Even though
Sure.
I know she knew it, but she still couldn't get certain voices out of her head when they were
Sure.
saying like don't do this. And
Yeah.
it would be great if as society we could just be a little more compassionate in this regard. Like I know we're not going to get there politically, we won't get there between
Thanks for
Yankees and
working on
Red
the
Sox
Dad Pod with
fans,
us.
but
Any
at
resources that we
least
mentioned
like
during the show
compassionate,
will be
like
in the show
mom to
notes.
mom,
If you have questions,
and
thoughts, or just want to talk
birth
with us,
partner to
the
birth
best
partner.
place is in the comments on YouTube. We're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Threads at Working on the Dad Pod, and on Twitter at Working on Dad Pod. Following and subscribing is always appreciated. Please rate and review us. That helps get the show to new people. And if you know a dad who would enjoy our show, sharing it with them is a huge help to them and us. Have a great week.